Hello everyone, welcome to the session. Today we are going to talk about right to education. The objectives of today's lesson are to understand what it means by right to education, to understand the various bylaws of the Right to Education Act, and to see how this act can be further improved in order to truly make it a right of every child in India. The Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act or Right to Education Act RTE is an act of the Parliament of India enacted on 4th August 2009, which describes the modalities of the importance of free and compulsory education for children between 6 and 14 in India under Article 21A of the Constitution. India became one of the 135 countries to make education a fundamental right of every child when the Act came into force on 1st April 2010. The Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009 is a milestone in the history of lawmaking in India. This Act received the assent of the President on 26th August 2009 to provide free and compulsory education for all children of the age of 6 to 14 years. The Act came into force on 1st April 2010 as per Section 1, Clause 3 of the said Act. The right to education has thus attained the same legal status as the right to life as provided by Article 21A of the Indian Constitution. The Act provides every child of the age of 6 to 14 years a right to free and compulsory education till the completion of elementary education in a neighborhood school. Special provisions are envisaged for children who were not admitted in any school or who have not completed elementary education. Objectives of the Act. Before we look at the entire Right to Education Act, let us first get a clear picture of the broad objectives of this Act. The Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Bill 2009 was approved by both the houses of the Parliament, and with the presidential approval under the Act, the following objectives were proposed. First, to establish the right of every child to be provided with free elementary education under equitable conditions in a formal school, that is, a school system which satisfied certain essential norms and standards. Second, to provide compulsory education, that is, to cast an obligation on the central government, state or local bodies of authority such as municipal corporation or municipal council or Zila Parishad or Nagar Panchayat or Panchayat to provide and ensure admission, attendance and completion of elementary education for all the children. Third is to provide free education, that is, no child admitted to a school which is not supported by the appropriate government shall be liable to pay any kind of fee or charges or expenses which may prevent him or her from pursuing and completing education. Fourth, this Act provides the duties and responsibilities of the appropriate governments, local authorities, parents, schools and teachers in providing free and compulsory education. Fifth, it is also specified and provided a system for protection of the right of children. A decentralized mechanism was also developed to address the grievances. This Act outlines the rules, regulations and duties of different authority bodies in order to provide quality education for all children between the ages 6 to 14 as per the constitutional fundamental right awarded to children in the 86th Amendment. Let's now have an overview of this Act. Now that we have seen the broad objectives of the Right to Education Act 2009, let us understand the nuances of this Act in depth. This Act was released by the Government of India in the forms of chapters, wherein each chapter all the rules and regulations are laid out clearly, which need to be followed by all the stakeholders involved in elementary education. In the first chapter of RTE, it defines a few important terms and lays out the map ahead for a clear understanding of the Act. It also mentions here that this law is applicable to all states in India except Jammu and Kashmir. Let us see the important terms and their definitions as provided under this law. The Act defines free as removal of any financial barrier by the state that prevents a child from completing 8 years of schooling, and compulsion as compulsion on the state rather than targeting parents. If there are children who are not enrolled or dropout children, they should be admitted to age-appropriate classes. The new Act does not impose strict rules for the admission of a child, like the issue of transfer certificates or other school-related certificates while taking admission into schools. It makes special provisions for children who are not admitted and are above age 6 to be admitted into their age-appropriate class. These kids need to undergo special training and they are allowed to complete his or her elementary education even if they are past the age of 14. This Act clearly lays down the rules for certain code of conduct by the teachers. No child shall be psychologically abused by calling him or her failed in any class up to class 8 or expelled from school, and it also prevents corporal punishment. In this chapter, the RTE Act discusses about the establishment of new schools and funding. The central and the state, both governments, are responsible for setting up schools wherever it is not available. And both governments shall share the responsibility in funding the setup of schools along with other obligations such as training of the teachers or development of curriculum, etc. RTE Act does not specify anything regarding the funding of the implementation of the Act. The amount that was suggested for the successful implementation of the Act was 2,31,000 crores. The issue of insufficient funds was raised by the state governments. The amount allotted is still grossly inadequate to comply with the norms prescribed in the Act. It also prescribes at least one classroom for a teacher and separate teachers for social science, languages, and science and mathematics. This eventually results in increase in number of classrooms as well as teachers. But most of the schools have single teacher and 50% of the schools are in fact schools only for the namesake. The mechanism of finance sharing between centre and states as provided in the Act are: central government shall prepare the estimates of capital and recurring expenditure. Central government shall provide to the state government a percentage of the expenditure. This percentage shall be determined from time to time in consultation with the state government. This chapter also lays out that the local authorities are in charge of the duties such as providing necessary infrastructure, providing good quality education. It should ensure the development of appropriate curriculum and train teachers accordingly. Apart from this, the local authorities are also responsible for the maintenance of the records of the children, maintenance of the academic calendar, etc. Finally, it states that it is the responsibility of the parents to send their children to school in order for successful implementation of free education for all. Reservation in private schools. This Act makes it mandatory for private schools, aided as well as unaided, to provide 25% reservation of their seats for economically weaker and socially disadvantaged students. These students will learn in private institutions without paying the tuition fees. The private schools will be reimbursed by the government on the basis of per child expenditure. But there are a lot of hurdles in the implementation of this clause, like there should be rules and procedures set up for the selection of students who would study in private schools. The clause weaker and disadvantaged section needs clarity in definition. Implementation of the said provision should be done without overburdening the other 75% of the students in private schools. Next is school recognition. According to this Act, all schools need to be registered or given a certificate of recognition from the respective government bodies. These certificates will only be issued when the schools meet all set standards by the government for the proper functioning of schools. Schools running without this registration would be paying a capital punishment of 1 lakh rupees per annum. Beyond this period, the schools would be liable to shut down by the government. But this clause of the Act can be a little discriminatory to the private sector schools, since the conditions of government schools in India except Navodayas and Kendriya Vidyalayas are not in good condition, and this clause of the law is only applicable to private schools and not government schools. According to this law, a school management committee should be formed. This committee should have teachers, local authorities, parents of the children. This committee is responsible for taking care of the school and also for planning of the grants that a school might need. Next is teachers. The Act makes it mandatory for schools to have one trained teacher for a maximum of 30 students. The pupil-teacher ratio, which is normally set at 30:1, and for schools with students exceeding 200, the same shall not exceed 40:1. The Act strictly states that no teacher posted in one school shall be made to serve in any other school or office or deployed for any non-educational purpose. It also states that the teacher vacancies in a school should not exceed 10% of the total strength of teachers. The teacher's duties entail finishing curriculum, taking attendance, helping in learning in the classroom, and finally, meeting with the parents of the students on a regular basis. The Right to Education Act clearly mentions that an academic authority appointed by a central government would lay down the rules for the required qualification for a particular post in schools. This Act also addresses the issue of teacher training programs. It is made the duty of the appropriate government and the local authorities to provide training facilities for the teachers. The Act prohibits private tuition by teachers as well as the deployment of teachers for non-education purpose except for decennial census, disaster relief and elections. This chapter discusses the rules regarding the school curriculum, but it does not outline the specifics of the curriculum and the evaluation procedures. It states that the curriculum and the evaluation procedure for elementary education shall be laid down by the academic authority to be specified by the appropriate government. Let us look at the screen now. Curriculum by prescribed academic authority should conform to constitutional values. A learner's physical as well as mental well-being need to be taken care of. One should understand students' ability levels and their knowledge. Make child free from fear, trauma and anxiety. Medium of instruction could be child's mother tongue to the extent possible, and provide for comprehensive and continuous evaluation. Act makes it mandatory that no child shall be required to pass any board examination till the completion of elementary education. Examinations are known to produce mental trauma. Fear of failure, particularly at a tender age, leads to loss of self-esteem. The policy of no board exam does not mean that there is no strategy to evaluate the student's performance. A system of continuous and comprehensive evaluation is laid down which will enable individual attention to each and every student by the concerned teachers. The records so made shall be used by the teachers as a guide in helping each child reach desired levels of educational achievement. The RTE Act assigns National Commission for Protection of Child Rights or NCPCR, State Commission for Protection of Child Rights or SCPCR functions in order for the smooth functioning of the schools. The functions of these bodies include the following. These bodies have to examine and review safeguards for rights under this Act, and they should recommend measures for effective implementation of child rights and protection. They have to inquire into complaints relating to child's rights to free and compulsory education. Both NCPCR and SCPCR have powers assigned under Section 14 and 24 of the Commissions for Protection of Child Rights Act. Where SCPCR has not yet been formed, then appropriate government may constitute an authority to tackle the issues of child rights and their protection. One can address their grievances by making a written complaint to the local authority having jurisdiction. The local authority shall decide the matter within a period of 3 months. The right to appeal shall also be used by a person aggrieved by the decision of the local authorities. The appeal will be heard by the State Commission for Protection of Child Rights or any other authority prescribed by the Act. The Act also stipulates formulation of national as well as state advisory councils consisting of such number of members not exceeding 15 to be appointed amongst persons having knowledge and practical experience in the field of elementary education and child development. The Act also stipulates formulation of national as well as state advisory councils consisting of such number of members not exceeding 15 to be appointed amongst persons having knowledge and practical experience in the field of elementary education and child development. The function of the advisory councils shall be to advise the centre and state respectively for the effective implementation of the provisions of the Act. This brings us to the end of all the chapters written in the Rights to Education Act implemented in India. Apart from what is stated in the chapters of RTE, the following given are a few more important issues that have been raised by this Act. Let us now see these important issues. First is compulsory attendance. The emphasis on compulsory attendance is an indirect way of curbing child labour. The best way to prevent child labour would be to ensure the presence of children in some other places, say educational institutions. There are provisions in RTE Act which makes it obligatory for the appropriate government and the local authorities to ensure and monitor admission, attendance and completion of elementary education by every child. Next is removal of class or caste consciousness. The RTE Act makes it a duty of the appropriate government and the local authorities to ensure that the child belonging to weaker section and the child belonging to a disadvantaged group are not discriminated against and prevented from pursuing education on any grounds. This is an answer to the dilemma put out by the University Education Commission, which had Dr. Radhakrishnan as its chairperson. In a democratic society, opportunity for learning must be open not only to the elite, but to all those who have to carry the privilege and responsibility of citizenship. Next is common school system. The idea of a common school system is as old as Kothari Commission. Kothari Commission or Indian Education Commission 1964 to 66 emphasized on the expansion of educational institutions broadly with an accent on equalization of educational opportunities. The committee had recommended education to people of all strates of society and envisaged a common school system of public education. A recent trend of double standards of education is alarming. The students from government schools are in no way at par with the students from private educational institutions and international schools. The government schools in India remain as an instrument of job security for teachers and peons rather than an access to quality education. The campaigning of government teachers at the time of admission as well as inspection, irrespective of the lack of infrastructure and other amenities, clearly depicts the existing scenario. Acharya Ramamurthy Committee, which was instituted to review the national policy of education, has clearly laid down the need to end the disparities between schools by upgrading the quality of ordinary schools and providing amenities for minimum levels of learning towards attaining the goal of common school system. The suggested determined action of both centre and the states in this regard. The common school system was enshrined and passed by the Parliament in every national policy on education since independence vis-à-vis 1968, 1986 and 1992. Suggestions for improvement. First, performance-based pay scales shall be considered as a way to improve teaching. Second, assist private unrecognized schools to improve their facilities including infrastructure so as to comply with the norms and standards prescribed by the Act, thereby avoiding closure within 3 years. Third, bring about more clarity in the implementation of the 25% reservation in private schools. Fourth, conduct awareness campaigns so as to raise the awareness about the RTE Act among the common mass, thereby increasing the grassroots pressure. Schools need to be made aware of provisions of the 25% reservations, the role of SMCs and the requirements under the schedule. This can be undertaken through mass awareness programs and enlightened moves of the local authorities. Fifth, restructure the current licensing and regulatory policy in government sector. Let the policies be structured in such a way as to encourage the well-intentioned entrepreneurs from opening more schools. Starting a school in Delhi, for instance, is a mind-numbing, expensive and time-consuming task which requires clearances from 4 different departments totaling more than 30 licenses. The need for deregulation is obvious. So in today's session, we have understood what right to education means. The session started with the background or the context in which this Act has been implemented in India. Then we moved on to understand and analyze the various rules under this Act presented in the form of chapters. After a quick understanding and analysis, we finally looked at the ways this Act can be further refined in order to actually make education free and an indispensable right for all the children across the country. With this, we have come to the end of today's session. Thank you.